Okay,
Thank
Ron,
you.
let's begin with you. Explain for our viewers about your organization, the Federation of Labor, who you're fighting for, what you're fighting for, and then we're going to get to the discussion. Thanks. Go ahead.
We're a 300 affiliate federation. We have about 800,000 union members in the county of Los Angeles, and we fight for workers. We, the one of the union mottos is wages, benefits, working conditions, and we try to get what is actually fair. If I had to explain it in one word, fairness.
Ron, you heard Lenny Rosenberg in my field report. He's insisting a federal $15 minimum wage. He says, look, it's going to kill business. He's already fired many of his employees over the minimum wage increase. I know I was there when he fired some of the employees, and he says he's going to fire even more workers to save his business if he has to. Is Lenny right or wrong with, I guess you could say it's his personal crusade on behalf of restaurant owners because he's so vehement about opposing this mandated minimum wage increase, and especially when, as he says, COVID is already decimating restaurants and businesses?
Those are blanketed statements that someone like myself, who has negotiated contracts for decades against major corporations, small companies, we hear that all the time. Union negotiators aren't here to, hurt companies. We're out to negotiate what's fair for workers. That's our number one goal. But those are blanketed statements that, I'm pretty familiar with. I think that, individually we have to look at things and individualize them. You just can't blanket a statement and say, because the federal minimum wage goes up, it's going to, cause bankruptcies and companies are going to go out of business.
Rick, to you now, and I am going to say you are nothing like Lenny Rosenberg. There were thousands of critics of Lenny on YouTube after we did some other minimum wage reports, and they're saying he's the most annoying, the most arrogant person ever. He's dubbed himself the Michael Jordan how many times in the report at the beginning of this broadcast. However, with that said, I'm guessing you do agree with Lenny that a federally mandated $15 minimum wage increase, not good, right? It's not good. The government should not be doing this. Rick, is that correct? And if so, who should decide wages and prices?
Well, partially correct. I do think the government has a role to set a floor. In other words, you have to have, in my opinion, a minimum wage to avoid exploitation, slave labor, sweatshops, that sort of thing. So I think most people would agree with that. But we're talking about more than doubling the federal minimum wage. And, Ron talked about negotiations, and that's true. Everybody blows smoke, and employers are going to take a stance. But that's the beauty of having a union and negotiating, is that you sit down and rhetoric aside, both sides finally settle on reality. When you put it in the political sphere like this, unfortunately, I think it's much more that the rhetoric can take over and decisions can be made which are really bad decisions. And I think raising the minimum wage, especially this drastically, minimum wages periodically get bumped up, but this is more than a doubling. And, let me just cite the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. That is a nonpartisan arm of the federal government. It's respected by economists and politicians all across the spectrum. And based on their best guess, more people will lose their jobs when if you raise the federal minimum wage to 15, then will be lifted out of poverty. Their estimate is like 1.4 million will lose in lost jobs. About 900,000 people will be lifted out of poverty. And you say, well, how can that be? All these people are going to get raises. And that's true. There's going to be a lot of people getting raises. But a lot of those minimum wage jobs don't go to the working poor. They're spouses with second incomes, or having a second income to supplement the family budget. It's people working second jobs. It's college kids off for the summer. And so some of that raise goes to those people. And so you will have people that benefit, but the losers, the 900,000 estimated lost jobs, are the very people you're trying to help for the most part. The unskilled, The people with low education, they're looking to gain a skill, get into the job market, and then they move up. Most people don't stay in those low-paying jobs. They move up. That's the beauty of this system. And eventually, a lot of them become members of one of Ron's unions, and they get really good money then. Anyway, that's why I think mandating a federal minimum wage, more than doubling it, is a terrible idea.
So, Rick, what do you say to all the folks like Ron Herrera who insists these workers must have a livable wage? They say it's as simple as that.
And you know what? That is where the social programs of society come in. All right. And the low-paying jobs are not the vehicle. In a way, we shouldn't think that the minimum wage is going to be able to support a family. I think, roughly speaking, if I'm right now at where the minimum wage is $7.25, I think it works out to $15,000 a year. That's just about at the poverty line. Okay, so one person, yeah, they can probably support themselves on that. You can't support a family on that. And then you get kids, you have kids, spouses and stuff. And so they're not there for that. They're training jobs, they're stepping stones. And if for those people that can't step up higher, we have other things. I think maybe we'll get into it later, but the earned income tax credit could be enhanced. I think that's a much better way to go. The other beauty of that, David, is that it takes the burden away from just restaurants and those industries with the low paying people. And basically the government, the taxpayers say, all of us are going to have to share in this. All of us have to accommodate people who need their income supplemented. But the answer isn't, to my opinion, the minimum wage, because you create winners and losers, and some of the losers are the people you're trying to help.
Ron, as you know, there is concern with a $15 federally mandated minimum wage. The business owners, they're crazy with worry these days. They fear that $15 is eventually going to become $20, even $25 an hour. And they say it's not sustainable. And again, as we've talked about, COVID has already killed business here in LA and throughout the United States.
I like the statement that he made that the federal government should have a floor. I think that's very important, but when the floor hasn't been risen since 2009, of course there's going to be double digits. But if there was a progressive increase, that was gradual from 2009, we might be above $15 an hour. So that's an interesting statement, because I do agree with that. But there has to be a vehicle that the numerics of a wage increases, and I mean, it would be idealistic of me to think that it could follow the costs, the average costs and deficits, nationally, but something.
Also, Ron, in fairness to Lenny Rosenberg in my field report, isn't minimum wage, as he pointed out, meant for the entry-level employee? He kept telling us that over and over again. He's saying in a capitalist society, a worker should strive to achieve greater success and not have to constantly rely on $15 for the rest of their adult life.
I have a lot more confidence in our legislators than that. That's sensationalism at its finest. I think that, we got to keep the drama and dramatics out of it, because we have a lot of people, suffering. With all due respect to Rick, he mentioned subsidies, but, subsidies come from taxation, and we're critical of raising taxes to create these subsidies. But if we're looking in through the lens of, let's say, a smaller employer, but what about those employers that are a lot larger than that are taking advantage of this? And I just feel, just to get it out there, that progressive increases to the floor is vital, because it keeps things real, and it as costs go up. Look, we can I'll give you an example. If somebody was selling opened a restaurant and he was selling a hamburger, did that hamburger go up in price from 2009? I'm sure products did. What he's paying for whatever it takes for a restaurant to be run, And, labor has to be respected as such, and wages have to, be respected. Because all we're talking about, we don't want to be a society of poverty.
Well, Ron, let me ask you, doesn't the earned income tax credit, can't that do the same thing? And isn't that even more targeted? The beauty of the earned income tax credit, as you know, that's an offset. The earned income tax credit is an offset on your taxes. So if you're working poor and you owe taxes, your tax can come down. You can even get a rebate. You get a check from the government if you don't pay any taxes, and you still haven't hit the certain income level. It's done by filers, so it's the whole family, so it takes into account what everybody earns. And it just seems to me a much more targeted way and a fairer way to do it. And yes, you bring up a good point. Then the taxpayer foots the bill. But the way it is now, businesses foot the bill. They wind up cutting jobs. Consumers pay more. Why not do it in a way that I think is really fair? In something like that, the earned income tax credit, there's other proposals, but they're all based on that sort of an income test sort of deal. Why isn't that better than the minimum wage?
I think my answer to the subsidy, it falls back in line with that. We're relying back on the federal government for aid to companies, to restaurants, to businesses. And I don't think that should be, our escape path to this. And, a worker, look, someone goes to work, they're not me and you, right? A worker goes to work for dignity and respect. And I think that there's always compromise. That I stated that I've negotiated contracts and been pretty successful, and on both sides. We've been able to keep companies, flourishing, and we've been able to keep our members working. And we've shared in profits because of that first word that I said, fairness, right? And I think that if we can, in a perfect society, right, that word goes miles, right? But if we're closed off to it and we keep using the subsidy angle, right, that we always have an scapegoat to the federal government, I don't think that's the way that the direction that we should be going.
Rick, talk about what Ron just mentioned, and also talk about the cost of living. I've heard you talk about this before in relation to the minimum wage. In other words, life is so different financially speaking, and let's say here in Los Angeles or in New York, as compared to, you could say, Iowa, North Dakota, West Virginia, Rhode Island, right? Is an across-the-board federal minimum wage unfair to those states, Rick? No,
and that's a good point you bring up. And another is, for instance, and I'd be interested to hear Ron's take on this, but California, this increase in the federal minimum wage will have no impact on California. California, it will phase in, I believe it's 2023, but we're already on our way to $15 in California, and that's 2 years ahead of this federal proposal. So in California, New York, high cost states, they've already raised it, and states, I think, have a better sense of what the minimum should be than the federal government. Interestingly, Joe Manchin, Democrat senator from West Virginia, he's basically the guy, I think, that kept this federal minimum wage out of the current COVID legislation. I think he's saying that he wants to see the minimum wage raised in West Virginia, but he wants it to go up to $11 an hour, not $15. So in many states, $15 an hour starts getting close to what the average wage is. And so that could have a very serious impact on jobs.
The way I look at things, this is bipartisan. This isn't a party issue because both parties have affiliated workers that are getting the federal minimum wage. But, I look at it like $7.25 in 2009. That's approximately $290 a week, right? $15,080 a year. That has to be looked at. I mean, I don't care what state you're in, that would not sustain a family. And that's what we're talking about, is sustaining, a family, no matter if they're from Montana or they're from Illinois. I think it's something that we really, really have to look at and create that floor. I agree with Rick. We create a floor and then see what the states do from that point.
Thank you both so much, Ron Herrera and Rick Reiff, for a great discussion. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Rick, very much.